Welcome to Politically Basic. I'm your host, Kyle Campbell. We're breaking down the basics of all political issues and current political events so that you get to decide. We're always talking about our bellwether state of California. And on today's show, we're hearing from California State Senator Shannon Grove. She served in the U.S. Army, and while stationed in Frankfurt, Germany, she witnessed the fall of the Berlin Wall. Following her service to our nation, she established a staffing company where she currently serves as the CEO. Prior to her election to the state Senate, Senator Grove was the first woman veteran elected to the California legislature and has served as the Senate Republican leader. 2 years ago, Senator Grove was elected to the 12th Senate District, where she continues to advocate for small businesses, farmers, and families. Senator Grove, thank you so much for joining me today on Politically Basic.
Thank you, Kyle. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate the subjects we're going to cover today.
Absolutely. There's a lot to get to. We are sticking very California-centric today, but as you know very well, there is so much to talk about. And California really sets the tone and the pace for so much legislation that makes its way across the country. So I'm extra glad to have you on the show today and be talking about some of this legislation and things that you're focusing on. So let's jump straight into it. We'd love to hear from you on some of these basics. For those who have never really heard the differences broken down on this, can you please explain the role of a state senator versus one of a U.S. senator? We are politically basic after all, so we appreciate you breaking down those basic political concepts for us.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, I completely understand that. I do run into a lot of people that the first thing I'll say is, they'll complain about something and I'll say, well, who's your senator? And they're like, oh, I don't know. So absolutely. So the U.S. Senate, which each state gets to provide 2 senators to the U.S. Senate that meet in Washington, D.C. I'm part of the California State Senate. There are 40 senators in the state of California, and districts are broken down for roughly about 1 million people per seat. I represent the Central Valley, which is, I have Kern, Tulare, Fresno, some parts of San Bernardino County in this district, but I have a voice for conservative values, and I also have a voice for protecting children and the underserved all across the state.
Amazing. Yeah. Isn't it something like what percentage of food is grown in the Central Valley for the nation? It's a majority, right?
It is. I actually represent the top 3 food-producing counties in the entire world. So it's Fresno this year. It kind of goes back and forth, but Fresno, Kern, and then Tulare County. And they are the top 3 food-producing counties in the world. And then I also represent 70% of the state's oil and gas, and then 53% of the state's renewable energy. And when you think about that in perspective to California, there's 58 counties, and my district represents 53% of the renewable energy.
Wow, that is amazing. Okay, well, we know a little bit about the differences between a state senator and a U.S. senator. What about the California state legislature? It is unique, right? Are you guys full-time? Are you not full-time? Maybe you can share a little bit about that specifically.
So the California state legislature is considered full-time. It's usually Monday through Thursday, and we get a week off for Easter. We get a month off for summer. And then at the end of any legislative session, like August 31st of this year, then we're back in our districts September, October, November, and December, and for the election cycle. And then we go back in January. There are 80 assembly members, which what we would call the assembly or the lower house. There are 80 assembly members. So usually 2 assembly districts will make up 1 Senate district. And then, like I said earlier, there's 40 senators.
And you guys are just one of 10 full-time state legislatures in the entire United States. That's incredible.
It is. And actually, when I first got here in 2010, I ran a ballot measure for a part-time legislature to be modeled after Texas. We're some of the highest paid legislators in the nation. And I think that if we could get well-rounded people that have a regular job for a living, individuals who this probably isn't the best job they've ever had, we might have a different policy-making body. But because you can make upwards of $178,000 a year as a state senator or an assembly member. That's including per diem. And then you get also, I think it's $171 a day per diem, plus travel, plus expenses. I think sometimes it becomes one of the best jobs that people have ever had. And there's nothing else to compare it to. So you have a lot of individuals who are staffers, and nothing against staffers. Staffers are great, but not people like, like we'd like a lot of small business owners, or we'd like farmers, or we'd like just individuals that have life experience outside of the legislature to be able to make policy.
Yeah, that seems to be a common experience that you find people in political leadership who have never run a business or experienced anything that would help influence the work that they would do in that position of political leadership. So I would have to say that I'm with you there. And, but we appreciate the full time work that you're doing. You certainly have a lot on your plate. And before we dig into all of that, I'd like to take a step back. Your bio says that you experienced the fall of the Berlin Wall. That is so remarkable. You watched the sort of physical expression of the fall of communism there. So I'd love to hear what you think about the current condition of our constitutional republic today.
I often compare it to my time in service in the military. I was actually stationed in Germany when the wall came down between East and West Berlin. And I say East and West Berlin still, even though it's all Berlin now. But, when you have that language that's embedded in you for the entire time you've been in the military, even back those years, I just still call it East and West Berlin for some reason. But well, my colonel had said, hey, type a flight manifest. And I'm like, with all due respect, sir, unless I get to go. So we actually took a helicopter over. We didn't go right up to the wall. There was hundreds of thousands of people, if you look at some of the videos. And, it was interesting prior to, and I'll take a little step back. Before the wall came down, we went over to East Berlin through what they call Berlin travel orders. And you go through checkpoint Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. And when you got to the other side, it was a completely different world. On this side of Berlin, our side of Berlin, it was just like America, right? Just like regular Germany. There was no big differences from what we experienced. And then on the other side, it was restrictive. There was barbed wire. There was bread lines, because government would say, you're going to get paid this much money. So why produce more bread if you're only going to get the same amount of money? For example, retail was way different. When the wall came down between East and West Berlin, and I was there with my colonel on a plateau, actually it was in November, and I saw this young man, very thin build, come through. He had a sweatshirt on that was too small. His jeans were high watered. And he came through the wall and he just like fell on the ground, and you could tell he was sobbing. Like you could tell he was sobbing. And I thought, wow, that guy knows what it's like to lose his freedom or to gain freedom, if you want to use the reverse part of it. And when I think about what's going on in America today, how they're so politically divisive, and they divide us by class and by race, and they divide us by, socioeconomic disadvantage versus advantage. I look at that. It's not a physical wall like the Berlin Wall, but it definitely is a wall. Fear of our existence, whether it's producing food or buying food, whether it's a farmer versus a retailer, whether it's it doesn't matter. They're dividing us, and that's very scary in the climate that we have now.
Yeah, that's really well said. You are in an area, your district is so important to many of these issues that are coming up right now and being discussed and debated in this presidential election cycle, right? You're in the Central Valley, and just for people who aren't familiar with California, it's not the Valley. That ain't the Valley. The Central Valley is amazing. People often think of California and they think LA, they think San Francisco, San Diego maybe, but the Central Valley is this like fabulous, amazing heartland of California. It's got some of the best people. And as you said, you guys are growing the food and producing the energy and really responsible for so many elements that keep our country going on a day-to-day basis. And so your job is so incredibly important, and you're fighting for that. I'd love for you to share with our Politically Basic audience kind of your areas of focus there as a state senator in that particular very busy and important section of California.
No, I appreciate that. It's ironic, the fights that you have to have. Like I said, we're the top 3 food producing counties in the entire world, and we fight for every drop of water They'd rather send water out to the ocean. And the last time they did some type of study through Davis on the Delta smelt, it was they found two. It wasn't like it's a non-indigenous fish, but water is restricted so much in the Central Valley, and we're just using the water to grow food that everybody eats around the world. The energy industry, 70% of the state's oil and gas industry, we are denied permits, and they're arbitrarily denied. There's no reason or cause for them to be denied. They actually just sit on them, and they deny our oil industry due process. They don't issue permits. But Californians still consume 1.8 million barrels every day of oil in their daily lives. And so what California does, and the leadership in California, they import oil from foreign countries like Ecuador, Saudi Arabia, sometimes Venezuela, Iraq, and that oil is brought to us by tanker ships, and they bring it to us. We offload it at our ports, and then we put it in our refineries, and we ship it to the distributor where you stop and get gas. That increases the cost of our fuel. You look at one of these ships coming from Saudi Arabia, it's 126 million metric tons of carbon emission that spews out over our ecosystem, when we could produce it right here in the Central Valley, put it in a pipeline, go down to the Torrance refinery, and then go to the distributor. We would save supply chain issues. We'd limit supply chain problems. When most of our oil comes from Ecuador, they bulldoze down the rainforest. They move indigenous people out of their homes. It's, and our purchase of foreign oil has global consequences. We're purchasing oil from Russia, and then Russia invades Ukraine. My Central Valley oil producers aren't invading other countries. They're just trying to make a living and put people to work. And if you look at the makeup of the oil industry, we employ 55% people of color, 54% people that are second chancers, women, United States military veterans. And it's just really sad that these jobs are being exported. Our jobs are being exported to overseas countries, some that are very hostile to us. And we use this oil every single day. And so the governor is right. He does say that there's a transition. We are transitioning off of fossil fuels. We're transitioning off of domestic fossil fuels and importing fossil fuels from other countries.
It's really illogical. So
It is.
Help me understand why. What's the opposition? Let's play devil's advocate against, your very excellent argument of why we shouldn't be doing all of those things, because it sounds crazy, and there's no way that anyone running a state, which still is the fifth largest economy in the world, why we would be not utilizing our own resources. What's the argument against that?
The governor says that he has a bias against the oil industry, which is true. He does. He did make that statement when he came to Taft, California. And when you think about, I'm an all of above person. Like, I think we need oil and gas, and we need to make sure that we have solar and wind, and obviously hydro energy, because it's all good. It's all good. But we need domestic energy here in the oil production. And the arguments on the other side of the aisle is that it's not economically sound, that it is not environmentally friendly. And California operates under the strictest environmental regulatory process than anywhere in the world. Like I said earlier, we're not bulldozing down the rainforest. We send money to Iraq. They still very seldom do they let women vote. They hang LGBTQ people. I mean, everything that California stands on, their values that they say that they want, we fund those other countries, and they have policies that are against the California value system, instead of producing domestic energy here and providing jobs. So when you ask what the argument is carbon emissions, but they don't compare or do an apples to apples study on carbon emissions. For instance, we requested information from the California Air Resources Board, CARB for short, asking them how much carbon emissions it takes to bring a ship from Saudi Arabia to California to offload for us to process the oil and use it instead of producing it here. And they gave us a letter, and best that I recall, a couple of years ago, this letter came out, and it was 12 carbon emissions. And I'm like, that's just not true. There's no way. These ships are very, very big ships. They operate on bunker fuel. It's the highest, most carbon intensive fuel. And it's hundreds, and it's all the way across our ecosystem from Saudi Arabia. And then we found out that CARB only measures the carbon emissions from 12 miles off our coastline. They don't measure point of origin to point of destination. And if they do, they rely on the foreign operator's report with no audit or validation. So I don't have an answer for that. I think it's just a political issue. I think it's a political ideology that they've taken. And instead of doing what's right by Californians, producing cheap, reliable, environmentally sound energy here, they get it from foreign countries.
Amazing. And I'm so glad that you are in the position that you're in and continuing to highlight these better ways forward. And we will stay hopeful that can happen. But I want to hear from you on some of these bills, some of the legislation that you have sponsored, co-sponsored, and put forward, because you fight for kids. I mean, that could be one of your main descriptors. You are a warrior for kids in the state of California, and you have sponsored some pretty remarkable legislation that shockingly has gotten a lot of pushback on some of these. So I'd love to hear from you first and foremost on SB 1414. Can you share what 1414 is, where it stands, and what's happening with opposition to that bill right now?
So if you don't mind, we'll go to 14 first, because that was passed last year. And I went to a Human Trafficking Awareness Month press conference, and there was a survivor that was speaking and talking about her harrowing experience that she had being sex trafficked. And at the end of her remarks, she said it's very sad in California that this is not considered a serious felony, meaning the person that does the trafficking can just get jail time instead of prison time. And I said, "Are you sure about that?" And she said, "Yes." So we sure enough researched it, and it was not a serious felony. So we ran SB 14 last year to make it a serious felony to sell a child for sex, meaning it would be added to the 3 strikes rule. And if you were a repeat offender of selling a child for sex, you could have a strikeable offense. And on your second offense, or excuse me, your third offense, you could go to prison for life. Now, that is something that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle do not like. They want to empty out our prisons, and even for sex traffickers of minor children. So we actually got that bill out of the Senate and over to the Assembly. And when we got to the Assembly Public Safety Committee, the members of the Senate Public Safety Committee, the chair, Reggie Jones Sawyer, killed that bill, and it died. And, we were shocked. We were, disappointed drastically for them to kill the bill. There was 2 Republicans that voted for it, and I'm not trying to make it partisan. I'm just giving you the makeup of the committee. And then the Democrats either voted no or did not vote. And you have to have so many votes, 51% of the vote of the committee members, to get it out. Ironically, the governor came to our rescue on SB 14. I think he realized it was a PR disaster and he needed to make sure this did. And I do believe that Jennifer Sable Newsom has a heart for this issue, and I think she had very much input with that with her husband, and I was excited for that as well. But he came to our rescue. So the same committee that killed 14 on Tuesday brought it back on Thursday, voted it, passed, got it to the governor's desk, and the governor signed it. So it is now in the state of California a serious felony and a strikeable offense if you have other serious felonies, and you'll get additional prison time. And a perfect example, the second case prosecuted this year under SB 14, a Stockton girl was 12 years old when she was taken out of Stockton. She was taken to Salinas at the hands of her trafficker for almost 12 days, almost 14 days, almost 2 weeks. It was 12 days, almost 2 weeks. She was brutally sold over and over and over again. At 13, she faced her accuser, and her accuser went to prison and is going to get 24 years in prison. That person deserves to be in prison. When we started working on 14, we worked with a coalition of human trafficking survivors, law enforcement partners, nonprofits, or nonprofit organizations. And they said, my trafficker at least fed me and took care of me, even though he required me to do these things. The buyers were brutal. The buyers, once they paid for you, they could do whatever they wanted with you. So this year, SB 1414, we went after the buyers of child sex. So if you're a perpetrator, a predator, and you are engaging what they call solicitation or buying, or engaging in buying a child for sex, I started out this year with wanting to make you go to prison. Right now it's a misdemeanor and you get a minimum 2 days in jail. I wanted you to go to prison for 4 years. I wanted you to have a $25,000 fine, and I wanted you to register as a sex offender. So championing this bill, we go to the Senate Public Safety, and they hostilely take over our bill. The Senate Public Safety Chair Aisha Wahab from Hayward, California, inserted hostile amendments. It eliminated 16 and 17-year-olds out of our felony protections. It's still a misdemeanor under the current bill to buy a 16 and 17-year-old for sex. It only protected 15 and below with a wobbler, meaning if wherever you're at in a state, whatever the district attorney decided to charge you, the perpetrator with for buying the child, it would be a wobbler, meaning they could charge a misdemeanor still or a felony. And then she took our $25,000 fine and she turned it into a $10,000 fine, but instead of and like a penalty and the $25,000, it's $10,000 or the penalty. So rich men with disposable income who like younger people of color, younger girls, it's evident out there. The data all shows that rich white men with disposable incomes like younger Black girls. That's what the data shows. They can pay the $10,000 and buy their way out of the crime. And the last and final bizarre amendment that she forced upon us was that they didn't have to register as a sex offender if they did not exceed a 10-year age gap. So let me put it in real simple terms. You could be 20 years old, engage in buying a 10-year-old for sex, and that's okay. But go after a 9-year-old and you're a predator. So we have fought and fought and fought all the way through the process, including sending amendments to the Appropriations Committee, which is the last committee the bill just got out of, to include all minors, meaning 16 and 17-year-olds, and we want a prison felony. As the bill got out of appropriations just yesterday, it's going to the assembly floor. It still excludes those protections for 16 and 17-year-olds because the Senate Public Safety Chair, Aisha Wahab, does not think that they need the same protections. Like somehow she thinks they're old enough to make their own decisions and they're doing these things willingly is what she thinks. So we still have those horrible amendments that they forced on us, but we have to look at the victory that we got in the state of California by protecting 15 and below. It doesn't go statewide. I have fears that down on the blade in Los Angeles, Gascon is not going to charge under a felony, but I do know a lot of district attorneys that will just bypass that misdemeanor and charge those predators with a felony in a heartbeat, including the district attorneys that I work with here in the Central Valley.
Yeah, that's absolutely the hope that this is the first domino and that strengthens other counties to do what you are proposing. And it's baby steps, right? I mean, I think you have a really great perspective on it. You're not going to get everything, but being able to protect who you can right now is absolutely a win. I'm so heartened to hear that. I read quite a lot about the amendment to remove 16 and 17-year-olds. And what I read did not make sense to me. So I'm hoping that you can make it make sense in the argument that because you're talking about sex trafficking, you're talking about a minor child being sold for sex and not consenting. And it seemed like there was the understanding that a 16 or 17-year-old would maybe be consenting. And so even though they were being sold, the person trafficking or buying shouldn't suffer a consequence because maybe that child was old enough to do something about it. Am I right? Am I wrong in thinking that? I wasn't tracking with that argument to remove those ages.
The arguments that came up in the Assembly Public Safety is the argument is that this bill targets Black and Brown communities and LGBTQ communities. And my immediate response is only if they're buying sex from kids. I don't want to say targets, but it targets everybody equally. If you're buying children for sex, my bill affects you. If you're not, it doesn't. So it shouldn't matter, about your gender identity or the skin color you have. If you're buying a child for sex, this bill would affect you. The argument on the 16 and 17-year-olds is that you're exactly right. It's like, well, they think that, they're able to either voice their opinion or that they can make a decision to get out of that situation, or that they're doing it because they have a need for means of resource, and meaning they need the money. And that's just not true. These 16 and 17-year-olds, we haven't seen a child on the street that is not out there with a pimp or someone trafficking them close by. They're not out there at their own free will. They're not out there because they're looking for a prom dress. They're out there because someone is forcing them to be out there. And if I shared all the stuff that my staff and I have read through our law enforcement partners that give us this, they are so reluctantly out there. They beg their trafficker, please don't make me go with that guy. I know he paid $1,000, but he's so big I can't breathe when he's on top of me. He almost suffocated me last time. I mean, this is a 16-year-old girl and a 14-year-old girl begging, because the guy likes to, begging their trafficker in a text exchange. Now, this person's now in prison, but they're not out there on their own free will. They're out there because somebody is forcing them out there. No one wakes up in the morning and says, I want to go sell my body for sex when I'm 14 or 12. And a lot of these girls that are 16 and 17, with the data that we have, they started being trafficked or touched or penetrated at a very young age, and then brought into the public square, at 12 or 13 years old. And it's just what they've known. And so they're not out there on their own.
Yeah, there's a lot of misunderstanding about the psychology of how that works. And you're right. There was a movement. Was it Kamala? I want to say it was Kamala Harris who said this a few years ago, that we have to protect people's right to choose to go into sex work. Do you remember that?
I do. Kamala Harris said it, and Scott Wiener from San Francisco actually ran a bill, and the governor signed it. It's loitering for the purposes of prostitution is now legal.
It's just such a glaring example of misunderstanding how this comes about and how this happens. No, you're right. Nobody wakes up, or nobody's in kindergarten saying, when I grow up, I want to be a sex worker. And I really hope I live in a community that supports that for me. This is a horrifying process of trauma bonding and manipulation and abuse. And on the outside, it can look like the victim is consenting, or because all these horrible trauma bonds have been created, and we need more education on it. But I'm so glad that you are fighting in this way to help people understand where the help is truly needed. And then on the surface, it might not always seem that way, but this is a tremendous need. And I'm so grateful to you that you are putting forward this legislation. There's another bill I want to ask you about, and it's SB 1043 ACT. What's going on with ACT, and where is that right now? Where does that stand?
So again, that was a bill. We're blessed to get that bill off of the Senate, the Assembly Appropriations. It's going to the Assembly floor for a full vote. We were contacted by Paris Hilton and 1111 Media Impact. So most people may not know, but Paris Hilton, even with the glam lifestyle that she lives, when she was younger, she was actually sent to one of these out-of-state camps per se, where they try to teach children, or to be certain behaviors and to be good kids. Not that she wasn't a good kid, but she actually was taken to one of these out-of-state facilities. Well, the data that came out on these out-of-state facilities when these undercover investigations took place showed the abuse and the torture, the sexual abuse, the trauma, the restraints, the seclusion rooms, everything that they were using, carrying a backpack of rocks on your back for so long, standing, 48 hours in a hallway, all these abuses that were going on with these kids. And she lived through that. And now she's using her story and her fame to be a catalyst to protect those kids that are the most vulnerable troubled teens that we have in our state. And across the nation. She's working across the nation. She's just working with us in the state of California to make sure they're protected. So about 4 years ago, we invested about $8 million to bring our kids home from these facilities. Now, these are foster youth kids. They call them the troubled teen industry. And the state of California established these things called STRTPs. They're short-term residential therapeutic facilities. Programs. And they're just these facilities where these troubled teens get sent. There's supposed to be audits. You're supposed to be able to look to see how often they've used restraints, how often they've used seclusion rooms, how often there's been injuries. And the of California hasn't done a good job monitoring that. So we worked with Paris Hilton, 1111 Media, and her husband Carter, and Zoe and some survivors of these facilities. And to hear their stories are, I want to say, as traumatic as, the abuses that go on with sex trafficking. There was sexual abuse. Zoe was locked in a dog cage for several days for refusing to eat a pat of butter at dinner. The restraints, they tie people down and, like in like on the ground, tie them down, totally prone, legs spread, arms spread, and they're there for days. That had happened.
Mm.
We've seen things where, arms are broken, hands are broken, but they've gotten medical treatment, but there's no data to show what happened to that situation. And so the bill that we're running with Paris Hilton is to bring transparency to these facilities and say, you will put up online and you will, with protecting the individual that's injured and the staff members' names and things like that, like pertinent information. But, case study one had to be restrained for 48 hours for this. They did defecate on themselves. We want that data so that we can use that data to create, as policymakers, to make good policy that protects these children. But without the data, we can't prove what's going on.
Yeah, it's incredible that that's happening, because when that legislation was passed, and correct me if I'm wrong, I want to say that was AB 403, that the goal was to not have foster homes anymore. Was that right? I mean, to not have foster homes, but to create a residential situation that was not meant for a child to be there in perpetuity, which is the ST part of STRTP, right? Short term. And it's therapeutic. And I'm well versed in this because I had a hand in opening one, actually. And the difference, I think, in this one, it hasn't been without its challenges. It's extremely challenging because you're rehabilitating minors and children who've really been to hell and back. And it takes a ton of work and people who are dedicated to it. The burnout factor's high, the money's low. It's one of the most difficult things I think that you can do. But this one had a lot of exposure, had a lot of eyes on it, a whole community watching. And so that was a different scenario. But it sounds like what Paris Hilton experienced, which is horrific, and what some of these STRTPs have kind of turned into was just sort of taking a big step to the side. It didn't really solve anything from removing kids from a group home situation, not a foster home, a group home situation, and just kind of plopping them down in another situation with a lack of oversight and really bad things happening. So again, just really great. Do you ever just stop and think like it's the 21st century? Why is this happening? Why are we doing this to kids? This is just, it's
Every day.
disturbing.
Every story, every day. Just to give you an example, when you say, do you ever just stop and go, wow, this is the 21st century? We'd meet people and, girls would like pull their shirt down like this, and they've been physically branded like you would brand cattle, brand cattle. And then I met an older lady, like my age, right? And I thought, oh, she must have been trafficked a while back. And she said, no, my daughter was trafficked. And I go, is she out now? And she says, no, they killed her. And I'm like, and she's telling me this horrific story. And I go, well, how did you know she was trafficked? The trafficker thought it was funny to send a video of her daughter, the daughter being raped by 4 or 5 men, to the mom, and saying, this is the life your daughter will live. So she saw it firsthand. So when you hear all these stories, when you hear a story about Zoe and what happened to her in a short-term residential, short-term therapeutic center, every day you think, my God, we're the state of California, and these things are happening to kids. When you go down to Los Angeles on the Blade and you see these side streets coming into Figueroa Street, and you see these car after car, 50 cars in a row, and they're driving really slow, and these young girls that they say they're 18, but they're not 18, and they just get in the back seat of that car because they're told to, and they drive to the end of Figueroa Street, and they get out, and then they go back and start all over because they're doing backseat services. It's heart-wrenching to think. And when you think about Just recently, there was a murder that was very high profile, and it also involved us here in the Central Valley because the mom lives here in the Central Valley in Fresno. Um, a 14-year-old girl that was controlled by one uh, gang that gang didn't get paid for the girls being on the corner, so they sent an enforcer, which ended up being a 14-year-old girl, to kill two of the girls that were on the corner, ran her over with a car, shot her, and then sent a message that they have to pay rent. That's a 14-year-old girl. A 14-year-old girl did this. And you have to understand that when you talk about what you did and reaching these kids, it takes time. And you know what's really frustrating to me is a lot of these kids are our foster kids, kids they call throwaway kids, and they're not throwaway kids. It's not these kids' issue. It's not their fault. I mean, their parents are either in prison or gone or whatever. They've been sexually assaulted. They have trauma in their lives, and it has to be the right person that reaches them because it takes a long time to trust an adult after they've been through what they've been through. So I admire you for starting a short-term residential therapeutic center.
Well, God bless you for the work that you're doing. It's harrowing just to hear about it. I can only imagine living through having to hear about these stories every day, and you're just continuing to fight. And I hope that you do for a very, very long time. So thank you. I'm very encouraged to hear the progression that those bills are making and the good that it's going to do going forward. So thank you so much for doing that, Senator. And I want to ask you again, just on the issues that California specifically is dealing with. I'd love to get your take on school choice. I know that is a big issue right now being discussed. It's a huge issue in California, where our educational system is struggling. But what do you think about school choice? What is it? How does it work? Are you in favor of it in California?
I am 100% a proponent of school choice, like 100% a proponent of school choice. Every individual in the state of California pays taxes, and the taxes that we pay are to fund our education systems and roads and infrastructure and things like that. The Constitution of the state of California guarantees that you have a free education, a free education. It does not say it has to be in a public building. So I would like parents to make the decision. If parents think that their kids are not functioning well or they don't agree with the ideology that's being pushed down on our children in the traditional public school system, and they want to do a charter school or a private school or a Catholic school or a Christian school or a homeschool or a hybrid, then they should have every right to do so, and their taxpayer dollars should be invested into that system just like they are in the public school system. I ran a piece of legislation. It was actually killed by the California Teachers Association, and I couldn't get any Democrat support. But the bottom line is that the heart that I had for that piece of legislation was I have a little friend. Her name is Chloe, and she's got Down syndrome. And she is a senior in high school this year. But up until her 8th grade year in the public school system, her parents were told, Chloe won't be able to do this. She can't do that. She can't do this. She can't do cheer. She can't participate in sports. She's going to have to stay over here in this classroom. They found a school called Legacy, and this Legacy is a private school. It cost about $10,000 or $12,000 a year to go. So her parents eliminated a lot of things out of their life to fund Chloe's education at Legacy. Chloe has now started an Instagram page called Chloe of Bakersfield. She talks about makeup and going to Sephora and skincare. She is an artist, and she has developed an artist. Her artistry is just extraordinary. She does these veterans patriotic flags, and she actually auctions them off for charities. And I think the last event I was at, this one painting she did went for $50,000.
Wow.
She is graduating this year from Legacy Academy. She goes to prom. She goes to classes with everybody else. She plays volleyball. So all the things that the traditional public school told Chloe's parents she couldn't do, she is thriving in this private school. And there should be taxpayer funded because her parents are taxpayers.
Mm-hmm.
It costs roughly about $12,000 a year to put a child through school, and that money should follow the student. And I am very much in favor of school choice for kids.
Yeah, that's a great example. I know her. I know
Do
Chloe.
you?
Yes,
Oh,
through
I didn't want to her last name just in case I didn't talk to her mom about talking about him,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
she
No, I know. And she's fabulous, and what a beautiful example of favoring school choice and how that benefits everybody, just choice in general, right? That is our freedom. And so I love that you talk about her, and everybody should go check out her Instagram. She's so cool. So I love that you're talking about her.
there's examples. There's kids that don't learn the same way as other
Mhm.
kids. And when you have 30 kids in a classroom, and if one kid's falling behind and then you have kids with speech impediments, right? They want speech therapy, and they don't offer that in traditional public schools, but there are private schools that offer a good education with speech therapy. I mean, think about a kid that struggles with speech. I know a family that's, paying again a large amount of money to go to a private school because for a couple of hours a day their child gets speech therapy, and it's just increased their ability to communicate. And other than that, the kid is just like a straight A student. He's actually a gate kid, loves science and technology, which you don't get a lot of in public school anymore. It's more DEI and different ethnic studies that are going through, and which I believe culture is important, and we need to make sure that people understand and accept people's culture. But we should be focusing on the things that are going to advance their ability to create an income and create wealth and be benefit productive members of society. And these private schools are doing it, but it's people that can afford to send their kids there. So I think money should follow student.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that argument is, well, this is a haves versus the have-nots conversation. It's really not. It's about giving everyone equal opportunity to make the best choice for their kids.
We did.
So
We started another piece of legislation last year that died as well. But the point is that we thought, well, let's take the bottom low performing schools and do a pilot program and give parents a choice, not to have their child go to this low performing public school, and see if we can get them, in an education environment where these kids can learn. So you stop this, perpetual generational non-learning environment. And they killed that bill too, would not
goodness,
even be interested in a pilot program.
too logical for them. We'll keep at it. No, we need it. Keep at it. People have got to get on board with this because the numbers and the statistics in the state are not going in the right direction. California, for as fabulous as it is, I mean, I'm the biggest fan of California. It gets ragged on a lot, right? And the rest of the
Right.
country is always like, we hate LA, we hate California. We wish that it would just perfectly break off along the border and float off into the ocean. but California is fabulous. And we're just a little bit off track right now. But we can't fail to talk about those great things and the really wonderful people who live here and do so much good for the rest of the country. But you're seeing a lot of these challenges day in and day out, and you're addressing them. And thank goodness you are. If you had to take California as a whole, Senator, and just look at what is the one greatest challenge you see today facing children and families, what would you say that is?
I think it's the education environment, right? When you look at it, you could start at 10, and in two election cycles, you would have uh, individual where you've molded their mind, for election cycles. So it affects the way that our policy is made. So I think that's a huge challenge. I agree with you that California is the greatest state. It really is. Maybe not now with the policies and
Mm.
the things set forth and the crime that we have. But when you look at our beautiful natural resources, our beautiful beaches, the forest, everything that we have here, the Joshua trees. When you look at our environment in California, the tech industry, like I said, the top 3 food producing counties in the world, everything that California has to offer is extraordinary. It's just the policies that are set forth that are stifling industries, stifling job creation, creating a high market of crime, and not having a secure border. With the policies that are passed out of Sacramento, closing down our prisons and releasing prisoners into the street, is not creating a safe environment where people can live and work safely. But we have a lot of work to do, but California is salvageable, and it's one of the most beautiful states you've ever been in.
100%. Is it salvageable with Gavin Newsom in charge?
I think his policies are way too far to the left. He is not going to ever relinquish on the oil industry. He's still going to import oil, which creates a catastrophe in itself. The policies that they, put in place at his direction, on, like, for instance, the state buying a refinery instead of it being, like they're going to treat it like a PG&E, like an IOU. So the state is going to own these refineries to process oil. And, anything the state really puts their hands to, like the DMV or the unemployment office, or taking care of our foster youth, or the STRTP programs that we have, when the state is involved, it does not really do well. And so I just don't think that that can happen. There are things that I work with him on that I appreciate working with him on, especially this human trafficking issue, Resurrecting 14. I'm grateful for that. But there are a lot of other issues. The homeless population, we've invested under his leadership $24 billion, and the problem has gotten worse. The housing costs have gone up exponentially, in hundreds of percents. 3 times what you're paying, 5 years ago for housing. It's just become an unaffordable state. Inflation, the cost of food, the cost of fuel, and that's all under his leadership. So I would say, no, we need a leadership change to turn California around.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. He seems quite pleased with himself for going and cleaning up the homeless encampments after spending that $24 billion. Only God knows where that money went. I mean, maybe someone in his office knows. That's a whole lot of money to do. And then one day after a Supreme Court decision on the ability for someone to literally live outside and sleep outside, it's all cleaned up. Are you seeing that in your area? Is the issue just gone? Or was that literally just a photo op and they're still dealing with it across the state?
It's not just gone, but now there are cities and counties that are removing homeless encampments from public spaces, around schools and our public parks, on the beaches, things like that, on freeways, on overpasses. And again, I'm one of the most conservative individuals, but I'm also a bleeding heart, I guess you'd say. I watched a video where, the homeless person was the lady. She was a lady, and she was frantically trying to get something out of the bags that people were loading up into a back of a truck. We don't know what that was. Was it a picture of her parents? Was it money in a sock? We don't know, but she's like, please, please, not that, please. And she's begging them not to take it. So while we need to address the homeless population, and we need to address the drug population that's in the homeless population, the sex trafficking that goes on. Prop 47 that we are repealing with Prop 36 had a lot to do with that, because you can't put people in jail for using drugs anymore. And then now they're just out on the streets. I think all of that needs to be dealt with, but we do have to have compassion as well. I mean, this is someone's belongings. It's where they live, right? So you have to give them at least notice to let them know you're going to be taking and cleaning up that area, and then offer them a position to go to a homeless shelter or someplace to get them off the street. There are people out there that just want to be out there. I know that sounds crazy to some people, but you talk to people, you get them off the street, and they're back out there the next day because it's what they know, and they can make quite a bit of money standing at a street corner begging for money. So, and it's, so a lot of people, when they say, I never thought that, I really didn't until I started talking to people on the street. As I talked to them when they wanted to wash my window or ask me for money, I'd, ask them how long they'd been out there, and they'd say, oh, years, it's an easy life. Nobody tells me what to do. So there are people out there that do want to be out there, but a lot of the elderly and a lot of people that are out there that are drug addicted, we need to try to get them off the street compassionately and give them the help they need so that they can be productive members of society.
I think that you should run for governor. I will be voting for you. I do hope that happens. We only got to kind of scratch the surface today, but I'm sure glad we had the opportunity to chat with you, Senator Grove, and hear from you. You have so much excellent common sense, and that's reflected in the legislation that you are creating and putting forward. And I am very hopeful, based on the successes that you've had, but just where your mind and heart is at, and your clear love for the state of California. So I'm thankful to you. I can't thank you enough for joining us today on Politically Basic and sharing the basics of what's going on in California with such critical legislation and the important work that you're so passionate about moving forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kyle. I really enjoyed it. It was I like the subject matters that you brought up, and I think everybody needs to be aware of what's going on in the state of California.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Politically Basic. We're committed to breaking down the basics so that you get to decide. Be sure to check us out at politicallybasic.com and follow us at Politically Basic so you don't miss an episode. And we'll see you next time.